Ramos, and I'm with the California Department of Public Health, and I'm joined by my colleague, Marianne Hernandez, who is assisting me today, and we will hear from a bit later in the webinar. We are glad you can join us today. This webinar is part of the Active Transportation Resource Center's ongoing efforts to support active transportation implementers by providing resources, technical assistance, and training for the success of active transportation program projects. As we get started, I want to express that green infrastructure isn't just about beautifying our streets, it's about creating healthier, more resilient communities. It plays a key role in managing stormwater, reducing urban heat, and promoting health equity through thoughtful, climate-conscious design that supports safe environments for walking and biking. So with that, and as we begin our webinar, Marianne will pull up our first poll. And if we can have folks answer just one question. And if you can check all the greening types you have used in your projects, if any. This will give us a good idea of the type of work that is being done out there in regards to greening efforts. Great, I see those answers coming in. So good, okay, Marianne, I think, oh, I saw last minute right before we ended it, a few people answered. Okay, we'll show results. So 80% trees, tree boxes, that's excellent. Planter boxes, many of you guys have done, over half of you guys, vegetation along sidewalks, wonderful. That gives us an idea of the work being done out there in regards to green infrastructure. Okay, let's move on. So before we dive into today's presentations, let's quickly go over a few housekeeping items. We encourage you to submit questions throughout the webinar by using the Q&A button in the Zoom interface to submit questions. When possible, please add the name of the presenter to whom the question is for. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. At the end of the webinar, each one of you will be prompted to complete our post-webinar survey, and we encourage your participation to complete the short survey as it helps improve the quality of our webinars. And lastly, the webinar is being recorded, and we will share with all who have registered for this webinar in the coming days a recording to the link. We will also have the complete slide deck and a resource document available on the ATRC website. By the end of this webinar, you'll be able to understand how green infrastructure can serve as a public health strategy to promote health equity and climate resilience and active transportation planning. You'll learn what green stormwater infrastructure is, its benefits, and how it's being implemented in many Bay Area cities. And you'll be able to identify the requirements and collaborative processes for installing green infrastructure in ATP projects in partnership with the California Conservation Corps. To help us explore these learning objectives in more depth, I'll introduce our guest speakers. We're excited to be joined by fantastic speakers today. Our first speaker is Daniel Wu, who serves as Climate Change and Health Equity Section Manager here at the California Department of Public Health. Next, we'll hear from Peter Schultze-Allen, Senior Technical Scientist with EOA Incorporated, who will speak on green stormwater infrastructure. And following Peter, we'll be joined by Anthony Pham and Sarah Ward, who will speak on the collaboration requirement between the implementation agency and the Conservation Corps when installing green infrastructure. Before we continue, I'd like to note a change in today's presentation. One of our originally scheduled speakers, who was going to provide an overview of green infrastructure in their ATP project, was unable to join us today. However, I'm pleased to share that my colleague Marianne Hernandez will be stepping in to share a couple of examples of green infrastructure from ATP projects. While Marianne won't be giving a formal presentation, we hope that the information she shares helps illustrate how green infrastructure is being applied to ATP projects. And with that, we will go ahead and dive into today's presentations. I'll stop sharing my screen. And Dan, if we can have you start pulling up yours while I read your bio. So Dan serves as the manager of California Department of Public Health, Office of Health Equity, Climate Change, and Health Equity section. He leads cross-sector collaborative efforts using a climate, health, and health equity in all policies approach to advance California climate change planning and programs, including in support of statewide efforts to achieve carbon neutrality, protect public health from climate change related health harms like extreme heat, and increase climate resilience for communities facing inequities. Prior to public health practice, Dan worked for nearly a decade in the area of green buildings, urban and environmental planning, sustainable design, and community development. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. Glad to be here today. So again, I'm Dan. I am with the State Department of Public Health. Previous to public health, I was, learning a lot and working on site-specific projects, a lot of it like mixed-use projects, infrastructure projects. And learning about low impact development strategies and green infrastructure and how that can help with energy and water use efficiency and other green building strategies. And as I worked in the field of like design and planning, more and more I was hearing about and learning how we plan and design our communities can have, tremendous impacts on our human health. And so that started my eventual transition to public health, where I am now at 10 years working with the State Department of Public Health. So that's a little bit of context. And I'm going to kind of set things up a little bit, provide additional, like more of that conceptual framing for my talk, but hopefully laying things out a little bit more for the other speakers that are to come. And so, I'm talking about public health through the lens of our built environments and infrastructure. And I know it was really helpful when I was starting my transition to the public health field to learn about actually, the difference between healthcare and public health, right? At the start of my journey, I was associating things like doctor's visits and taking medications and getting treatments and so forth with public health. But in fact, that is more of the realm of healthcare, really looking at people at the individual level, oftentimes when illness or disease has already occurred. And so we call that more downstream approach. So healthcare or medicine, right? And as I learned more about public health, then that really connected with, how we designed and planned and built our communities, whether or not people can walk and bike to places. And so that really is looking at the population level and really how do we prevent poor health outcomes and illness and disease from occurring in the first place. And so that really takes more of this upstream approach, looking at our natural, our built environments, our socio and economic environments as well. And so at the bottom of the slide is a definition that my team really likes to put forth, which is that public health is what society does collectively to assure the conditions, right? Like the living conditions for people to be healthy. And this is based on the Institute of Medicine's definition. Again, here, some more background conceptual kind of diagramming here. So part of addressing public health and looking upstream is to focus on root causes or the causes of the causes for negative health outcomes, right? And that is linked to the root causes of unfair or inequitable living conditions that result in poor health outcomes for certain populations versus others. And so, for those in the health public health field, this is not new information, right? Like studies have found that only about half or so of our overall health outcomes is because of medical care, healthy behaviors, genes, and biology, while the other half is really attributed to what are known as the social determinants of health, like environmental quality, social and economic circumstances, our built environments, and all of that in turn shape our stress levels, our behaviors. And that touches on things like smoking, diet, and exercise, right? And so again, our goal in public health is to move towards the left, upstream, towards these broader solutions that can help to prevent what you see on the right side of the slide, which is more of that downstream disease and injury, right? And so living conditions at the center is where there's a lot of opportunity. I think where a lot of folks participating in the ATP and other work around infrastructure, about transportation, land use, housing, all of that really occurs in that central segment there. And that is also where a lot of work can be done to help prevent, poor health outcomes. And it also happens to be a lot of where we can take action to address the climate crisis, right? So I come from the team that really focuses on addressing that intersection of climate change and public health. And so I'll touch upon some of the solutions through our built environments that can help with that, including green infrastructure. This slide is one that our department developed, really just kind of visualizing the different pathways that a changing climate, whether it's extreme heat or drought or extreme precipitation and storms and flooding, all of that can have a myriad of ways that can affect human health, and that can really worsen existing diseases and chronic health conditions. So think about like heart disease or respiratory diseases, and you have hot temperatures or wildfires and smoke. That's just going to make what people already are experiencing even worse. And then in the center, there's this kind of salmon colored circle outlined that highlight mental health impacts, right? So like for all of the physical health impacts that can occur, there's usually some level of like mental health impact, and that can range from like distress and stress to longer term trauma that often can be very long ranging. And again, just touching upon the basics of what we know with climate change, oftentimes those who are already experiencing inequities and injustices and have fewer resources and face more disadvantaged are oftentimes hurt first and worst, right? And so how can we really look back to those upstream solutions to ensure that there is a stronger baseline of community resilience? And again, this is not inherently those who have more disadvantage. It's not on them. It's not, their fault that there is more vulnerability experienced. A lot of this is based on existing systems and environments and policies that have been put in place that push certain population groups into more dangerous living conditions. And so I bring up the example of red line areas, historically red line areas, which, through the decades have ended up having less tree cover and more asphalt that in this case result in hotter temperatures and disproportionate risk and impacts. And so through the work at our department, especially since we are based in the Office of Health Equity, so much of the work really looks at like, how do we work towards a more fair distribution of power and access to resources? And this requires prioritizing investments in communities that are facing disadvantage and injustices. And that can then reduce the vulnerability to climate change related health impacts. So in practice, like how do we operationalize this? Then that can mean greater identification of communities facing disinvestment, and then prioritizing those communities for greater resources. That can include funding, services, facilities, trainings, jobs, and decision-making power. And that's something that the ATP program and other state grant programs can help with. So it can often be summed up as providing communities greater cash capacity and control. So despite the mounting health impacts of climate change, addressing climate change represents an opportunity to improve living conditions and health outcomes. So we look at these as win-win or no regret climate measures that can reduce emissions, increase health benefits, and address injustices. The good news is, if it's done thoughtfully and with meaningful community engagement, climate actions that reduce carbon emissions really can improve our health outcomes. And one prime example is the utilization of green infrastructure. So finally getting to the topic of today, planting of trees, increase urban and community greening, along with more nature-based methods of managing stormwater runoff, which Peter will go into more depth at the next presentation. For example, green infrastructure can collectively help to sequester carbon and increase resilience to extreme heat, also helping to reduce air pollution, improve water quality, recharge aquifers on a broader level. And then it can also be a part of supporting local food systems and community gardens, and better reducing the risk of flooding and managing the spread of disease-carrying insects. So a lot of benefits that could come from this. Diving a little bit deeper, right? Like looking at the research side of things, studies have demonstrated a range of improved health outcomes associated with increased contact with nature and greenness, right? That urban greening is associated with improvements in general health, enhanced brain development in children, improved cognitive function in adults, and improved mental health, as well as reductions in chronic disease such as diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and reductions in premature mortality, right? A lot of association with greening and health benefits. There's also consistent evidence that urban greening exposure during pregnancy is positively associated with birth weight. There's a strong association between neighborhood greenness and reduced risks of stress and mental health symptoms, and the prevalence of depression, and the effects may be even stronger in lower income communities. A nationwide study found that an increase in urban greening was associated with 37% lower odds of depression in lower income neighborhoods, compared to 27% and 21% lower odds of depression in medium and high income neighborhoods, respectively. So the benefits are outsized for communities that are facing more disadvantage. Urban greening can influence health by decreasing stress, mitigating air pollution, and really addressing heat exposure, which I'll touch upon a little bit later. And it's also associated with reduced overweight and obesity in both adults and children. Finally, there's been a connection with higher residential greenness to lower risk of death due to cardiovascular diseases. So again, a lot of literature and a body of evidence connecting greenness and green infrastructure to health benefits. I'll also touch upon how urban greening can really help to promote physical activity and social cohesion, and those are also ways that can help with health. Part of this, and I think a lot of the work that ATP grantees and folks attending this are probably already seeing and realizing, right, is that green infrastructure and community greening can help to encourage more transportation-related physical activity, so active transportation, like walking, cycling, and taking transit. And active modes of transport are critical because it can help to facilitate physical activity. And the flip side of that is that the lack of physical activity contributes to the early deaths of an estimated, nearly 20,000 Californians each year, primarily due to chronic diseases like heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, which are some of the top causes of death in California and across the US. So this slide is showing some of the findings that our team did to quantify the health benefits associated with more active transportation. This modeling exercise specifically looked at what some of the health benefits would be if we were to meet the California Transportation Plan's 2050 goals for increased active transportation. And so in short, there would be significant reductions in chronic diseases and prevent over 100,000 years of life lost to disease, disability, and death in the year 2050 compared to business as usual. And overall, this includes preventing a total of nearly 8,000 premature deaths on an annual basis. And so a key point here is that the health benefits are predominantly from increased physical activity versus other benefits. So you will see some reduced air pollution and carbon emissions, but that physical activity piece is just super, super important. So next, I want to dive a little deeper into extreme heat, right? That is the top extreme weather-related cause of death. And so it's something that California has, increasingly faced. And so green infrastructure can definitely help increase resilience to hotter temperatures in our neighborhoods. And again, I'll go back to kind of the backdrop of climate change, which is leading to more frequent, more severe, and longer periods of extreme heat. Last year was the hottest year on record globally. And heat is deadly, right? Heat kills more people, as I mentioned, than any other extreme weather related hazard. Approximately 1,220 people dying from extreme heat every year in the US based on estimates. And we know this is an undercount because a lot of the deaths that are heat associated are not recorded officially on death records as being due to heat. It could be because of a cardiovascular reason, but that may have been triggered because of hotter temperatures. So here we see many ways that heat can affect our health. I won't go into all of them, but I think some are fairly common knowledge, dehydration, heat-related illness and death. And like I mentioned, heat really can worsen chronic health conditions, whether heart conditions, respiratory, or kidney disease, and effects like pregnancy and birth outcomes. So I'll zoom out a little bit more. So I talked about the individual level heat impacts. And so at the community level, right, how we design our neighborhoods and cities really impact how people experience heat and how they fare overall on hot days. And so in many ways, cities are hot by design, right? There's a lot of asphalt and heat trapping building materials like dark roofs and lack of vegetation and tree canopies that cause our cities to experience the urban heat island effect and really lead to things like our schoolyards to be too hot, posing significant health to people and particularly to children. And so how we've designed our suburban neighborhoods, right? A lot of the sprawling type and car dependent neighborhoods just result in more cars on the road, emitting heat waste and greater amount of paving of natural landscapes and farmlands for roads. And that also reduces cooling land cover. Air conditioning can help in the short term, but relying on it too much can also create more risks for the long term, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions, and that has implications around energy use and costs for households. And so all of that is to say that we are facing a lot of kind of complex, multi-layered issues around heat. But the good news is that we have a suite of solutions available, and one of which is green infrastructure strategies. So lining trees with native plants and adding green roofs and walls are an important part of creating cool corridors to reduce the urban heat island effect and air pollution. And shade is one of the most effective ways to cool our bodies outdoors, right? To just reduce the amount of heat exposure, direct exposure when we're outside. And this is where shade trees can really significantly reduce the amount of heat and exposure to people in buildings. There's been a lot of great research and work being done by the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation, led by Dr. Kelly Turner and team, around heat and heat resilience for communities and urban environments in particular. And they found that shade can reduce outdoor heat burden as much as 30% or more. This can provide critical relief to communities that have less resilience or greater vulnerability to heat. And so greening is an important part of our toolbox for ensuring safe and livable communities. So finally, I'll just touch upon like some other funding options, right, that folks may be familiar with. We have the California Natural Resources Agency's Urban Greening Program, which funds projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also really helps to increase the greening in our communities. And then CAL FIRE's Urban and Community Forestry Grant Program also works to increase the long-term benefits trees provide, and also to mitigate the risk of environmental harms and exposures. And so at this moment, these grant programs don't currently have an open round of funding, but you can definitely sign up to receive notices when the next round becomes available. So with that, I will wrap things up. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to Alicia and team.
Great. Thanks, Dan, for that wonderful presentation, and always good to know about more funding opportunities. We will make sure to incorporate those greening funding opportunities into the resource document so that folks can do what you said, sign up for the notification when those grants open up. So thank you again. All right, we'll keep moving on with our next presenter, who is Peter Schultze-Allen. He is a senior technical scientist at EOA Incorporated, specializing in urban infrastructure, complete streets, green streets, regenerative landscaping, and urban forestry. His past experience includes managing the environmental programs for the city of Emeryville from 2002 to 2013, and the last 12 years with EOA providing stormwater permit compliance assistance to municipal staff around the Bay Area. So with that, we'll turn it to Peter. Go ahead and pull up your slides.
Yeah, are we doing a poll question right now?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. And there is our second poll question. Thank you for that.
Okay.
We have one question for you. I think we are seeing the first poll question that we already.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'm having a bit of problem finding your polls, Peter, but when I do, I'll let you know.
Okay, so yeah, I can start the presentation. Oh, wait, here it is.
Yep, we have it up. So the question is, what percent of a typical city roadway is permeable? And so allows liquid to pass through. And we'll ask folks to take their guess there.
Yeah, I guess maybe the question's I could clarify that the intent of the question is to ask what percent of a city is in the roadways. So of all the impervious pavement or impermeable surfaces in a city, what percent are roadways? So like how, if you add up all the roadways in an average jurisdiction, or maybe in your own jurisdiction, how much of that surface is impermeable, and what does it mean for the whole jurisdiction? Like if you think about impervious surfaces in your jurisdiction and roadways. So yeah, it's a little bit of a complicated question, but basically it's meant to get people to think a little bit about roadways.
All right, and I think we're sharing results now. So the majority, 63%, said 10%, 25% said 20, and then 13% said 30%.
Yeah, right. And so it does vary by jurisdiction. So this is kind of, I guess you could say, a trick question. There's not really any wrong answer there. I will say that I think the average is probably about 20% of a city's impervious surfaces are roadways. So it's a pretty big percent of the overall impervious surface in a jurisdiction. That's why I'm going to talk about green streets. So I'm going to pull up my presentation. Okay. Okay, so I think you're seeing the full screen now.
Looks good.
Okay. All right, so thanks very much for having me here today at the Active Transportation Resource Center's webinar. And my name is Peter Schultze-Allen, as mentioned, and I work for EOA, but we are also the program managers for the Santa Clara Valley Urban Runoff Pollution Prevention Program, or SCVURPPP. And so a lot of the work that we do is with the different cities in the Santa Clara Valley and the county, with Valley Water, some of our member agencies. We also work with a lot of agencies in San Mateo County and some in other parts of the Bay Area as well. So I'm going to focus on green and complete streets. So this kind of aspect of urban greening. And what about resilience and how does it make for healthier communities? So this is an outline of my presentation. I'm going to talk about green stormwater infrastructure, which we prefer to use that term GSI, or because it's more specific than green infrastructure. Green infrastructure sometimes is used in different ways, but green stormwater infrastructure, we think is a better term because it's more specific to what we're doing. Well, I'll talk about the benefits of GSI. What are some of our Bay Area stormwater permit requirements? What are green streets and complete streets? I'll give you some examples of that, and we'll talk about implementation over the last 20 years and some of the challenges and successes that we've had and things that are driving implementation of green streets. And then I'll give you some resources and a little summary. So we've already, I think, talked about this, so I don't have to spend a lot of time on defining GSI or green infrastructure, but basically we're using natural processes in the urban environment. And these are some photographs of different systems around the Bay Area. I'll give you a lot more, but we also want to highlight that cooler urban areas is the goal in a lot of ways now, and we want to use green infrastructure or GSI to increase that cooling effect and to cool cities in general. There's a lot of benefits. We've already heard about a lot of these benefits today, so I'm not going to go into the details here, but I did highlight heat and shading, resiliency, cleaner air, and we like to use this graphic that shows how GSI can be used as a green filter, whereas our typical situation is that we have a lot of impervious surfaces in the urbanized area that act as a gray funnel. And that is not just about pollution, but also about temperature into receiving water bodies, such as the San Francisco Bay. It's also about the volume of water. It can be about sediment and erosion. So there's a lot of different aspects of stormwater management. And that leads to my background slide here, that we are changing our approach to stormwater and now recognizing it as a valuable resource. However, it can be polluted by various impacts in the urbanized environment, sometimes from legacy pollutants as well. It can result in this graphic shown here, where you have certain fish that are not recommended to be eaten for certain populations or with certain frequencies. So that's what we're trying to do, is improve the quality of our stormwater and use it more as a valuable resource. So a little bit about the stormwater permit. I thought that it was useful to give a little bit of background on this. We do have different permits in the San Francisco Bay Area. This image on the right here shows which communities are under one particular permit, which is called the Municipal Regional Stormwater Permit, or MRP. And we are now in the third issuance of that permit. They're about every 5 years. And so there's 79 permittees, which are the cities and the counties and some other agencies that are in these counties that are shown in yellow. So those are the ones that we talk about, the MRP related folks, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. There are other permits for other parts of the county or the Bay Area, such as in San Francisco or in the North Bay. And the MRP requires that certain types of roadway projects implement GSI. I wanted to give this example. I think this is a nice graphic. There's 3 parts to this graphic that shows kind of a typical street before any improvements are made. And so it may have very wide travel lanes, narrow sidewalks, not very pedestrian friendly environment or bicycle friendly environment. It's really designed for cars. There may be some facilities for transit. But if you can change that to a complete street, which a lot of people probably in this audience know about complete streets, seeing this is the Active Transportation Resource Center, you have new facilities for transit or for cycling and for pedestrians. You might have some urban greening happening here with more street trees, expanding the sidewalk area through bulb outs. So there's a lot of things you can do with complete streets. But how does that then get integrated into a green street? So this is an image with green and complete street features. Now you've got some bioretention or rain garden at the top. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but I'll point out a few things here. You have pervious concrete, maybe in a parking lane. You could have more trees or bigger trees, and using sustainable landscaping or other types of pervious pavement. So this is what we focus on in GSI, is how do we move from maybe a complete street to a complete and green street. Now, some examples of what does bioretention, which is one type of GSI, what does this look like in a green and complete street? Here's a couple examples. One on the left from Emeryville, where I used to work, and one on the right from the city of San Mateo. So these are some projects that were installed. ATP, I think they were, well, they're certainly active transportation projects. Whether they got an ATP grant, I don't think so, but maybe using some ATP related funds. The Safe Routes to School project, or this was a Safe Routes to School project in San Mateo. And this was a project in Emeryville that used some other funds from the county transportation agency. Pervious pavement in roadway projects can look like some of these examples. These happen to all be actually from Berkeley, which is using a lot of different types of pervious pavement in different projects. So you have the pervious interlocking concrete pavers where the water goes between the pavers into these joints which have gravel in them. And compared to that, where you have pervious pavers where the water can actually go through the paver itself. So that's the example at the bottom. Here's another pervious pavement with concrete in these modular systems that can be called kind of a pervious concrete gutter area. And then you can use gravel with supported grid pavements to support the gravel and make it stronger and more, so it can support cars or other vehicles. And it's typically used more in parking lots, but it can also be in this case, like a parking lot. Pervious pavement and other types of projects. And these are also in Berkeley. Actually, the one on the left is in Berkeley. The one on the right is in Palo Alto. So this is pervious pavement in a crosswalk, or yes, and those two examples, there are two different types of pervious pavement. And then this is a great example from the city of Campbell on Hacienda Avenue. This is one of our largest green complete street examples in the Bay Area. It was a very wide roadway that was in poor shape in terms of the pavement. They didn't have any bike facilities. The sidewalks were not complete. So they had a lot of potential with such a large roadway. And this is what it looked like afterwards. This was completed, I think, back in 2015 or so, so about 10 years ago. They reconstructed the pavement with full depth reclamation and added biotreatment areas in these areas on the side of the roadway. They added bicycle facilities, bike lanes, planted trees in some in these little bulb out areas behind this car here, and some also in the bioretention areas, and added sidewalks to the whole, what about 1 mile long section of Hacienda Avenue. And they used a lot of city funds in addition to some grant funds from Prop 84 and from the Valley Transportation Authority. So here's a couple more examples of complete and green street projects. One here in Oakland, where I am, in my office, down by Lake Merritt, a great example of a separated bikeway or protected bikeway, also called a Class 4 bikeway from Caltrans, and bioretention in these planter areas along the sides here. And they've now taken out these planter boxes and put in, I think, more of a concrete barrier. Here's an example in El Cerrito on San Pablo Avenue, also a Caltrans facility. So they worked together with Caltrans on this project to put in this protected bikeway with, in this case, the bioretention is on the in between the travel lanes and the bike lane or separated bike path there. So now a little bit about implementation. What is driving these projects? Well, there's certainly stormwater quality related drivers, usually through the permit, our stormwater permit. So sometimes there are projects that are triggered and they have to provide stormwater treatment measures. Sometimes they're looking for opportunities in a capital improvement project. We also have now in the new permit implementation targets for GSI. But we also look at other programs and we try to integrate when we can green streets into other types of projects that are happening, because if you do green streets on their own, a retrofit project is more expensive. So integrating it with other programs like transportation projects makes it less expensive. Certainly, we're trying to do as much as we can with urban forestry, and there's a lot of potential there. And then looking at your climate adaptation or climate resilience plan or climate action plan and urban heat. I'm glad to be here today talking about public health. So that's a great aspect of working with other departments and programs and integrating green stormwater infrastructure into these other programs. So some of the successes that we've had, it is related to achieving these multiple benefits that meet the municipal goals, both for the stormwater permit and for other types of municipal goals, and public expectations of having projects that have multiple benefits. Public agencies are gaining more experience with GSI construction and maintenance around the Bay Area. We have about 200 we have 200 projects now, 200 green street projects that have been installed around the Bay Area in these communities that I mentioned that are under this one municipal regional permit. Over the last 20 years, we have urban forestry is being integrated with GSI. We have pervious pavement is being done. Although pervious pavement, I would say most of the green street projects use something like what's shown in this image, where bioretention with small plants. We're still learning how to do it with trees and how to install pervious pavement. And then there's a lot of training that's happening, which is great, with organizations like Rescape, which is a regenerative landscaping nonprofit trade association, the Watershed Project in Richmond, Grassroots Ecology over on the peninsula is working, for example, with the city of Palo Alto, Watershed Project with Richmond, and the Conservation Corps in San Jose. Some of the challenges are that just to find opportunities to do complete and green street projects. It's not always so easy to do that. And so we're struggling to find opportunities, especially cost-effective opportunities. There's a lot of utilities under roadways, and when you're installing GSI, you can run into those utilities and have conflicts with them. So that's a challenge. Meeting the public expectations for the aesthetics of GSI at a reasonable cost is a big challenge. We have the training of staff and contractors on landscape maintenance is still a big challenge, and we're doing more of that, but there's still a lot of work to be done there. And learning from other jurisdictions. Sometimes if you haven't done a project in your jurisdiction, it can be there's a learning curve there. And then adapting to a changing climate, hotter and drier, and also more intense storms. That can be really difficult with GSI. We use a soil media that is mostly sand and compost, and so it doesn't hold water as long as maybe a typical soil, and so it dries out faster, kind of by design, but that can also be challenging for the plants. And as we have hotter and drier climates in the future, we're going to need to look at that soil media and see if there are changes we can make. For example, maybe biochar might help with that, but we're still learning about that. Construction funding can be very challenging. We don't really have dedicated funding in most jurisdictions for implementing GSI. There's reliance to a certain extent on grants and sometimes, if we can, using transportation funding, but a lot of transportation projects don't have enough money in the budget to add GSI. The funding can have limitations on the type of systems that you can install, such as GSI. Maybe there's a limit there. And then in general, the larger projects, which we call regional projects, are more cost effective than doing one block at a time. So it can be expensive doing smaller projects. Also related to funding is this issue of stormwater fees. There are some jurisdictions have a stormwater fee, but raising that stormwater fee is not easy to do. If you don't have one, enacting a new stormwater fee is very difficult. Stormwater historically, and there are efforts to change this, but historically stormwater has not been classified the same way as the sanitary sewer programs or with your trash and recycling or drinking water, potable water. The fees for those three types of systems they're a little bit easier to enact or to raise the fees in those three categories than it is for stormwater. But there are some efforts underway to change that. But so far, that's been difficult. Also, funding for municipal GSI projects in general that is long-term and sustainable or more that you can plan on that kind of funding is needed. And there is an example of that, Measure W in the LA area. So we'll see if at some point we can get something like that in the San Francisco Bay Area. Also, maintenance is very challenging, both getting the funding for it as well as implementing it. Transportation projects typically don't, well, I should say grant funding for the transportation projects doesn't typically pay for maintenance, or most grants don't pay for maintenance. They pay for the capital and the construction and the design. But then the maintenance burden can become expensive for a city or a county or an agency, a public agency. And we're installing more and more of these types of bioretention and other vegetated systems all over the Bay Area. And that maintenance can be costly. It's usually new types of landscaping, like in this picture on the right here. You have street trees in a strip on the edge there. But this is a new bioretention area that was installed by moving the curb out into the street, called a stormwater curb extension. And so this is now landscaping that was never there before that needs to be maintained. That's as you build more and more of these systems, there's a bigger burden on public agencies. And sometimes the public isn't always excited about the types of plants chosen. Maybe they want to see more flowers and things like that we don't always use plants with a lot of flowers. We're using more bunch grasses and for the most part, native plants where we can in these systems. But there are a lot of times they're more green like this. And to some people, it can look more like a weed, even though they aren't weeds. they can sometimes look like that. So there's some issues with public perception. So to summarize, we have had significant Green Street implementation to date in the what I call MRP area. So that is, as if you think back to that map of the Bay Area that we had with the yellow, the counties and the 79 permittees. We have had 200, as I mentioned, plus Green Street projects estimated over the last 20 years. And we're integrating with complete street projects. We're getting multiple benefits. We still have, I think, a lot of potential with urban forestry and with the potential to use trees and plant trees in a different kind of way than what's happened in the past. Trees are often not given enough room to grow, and the average street tree only lives about 11 years in the urban environment. It's not a very good track record, and that's typically because we don't invest enough in the planting conditions for the tree. It's not given enough room for the roots to grow, and then it can cause problems with infrastructure, or it can just become stunted or die. So that's a big challenge. It's not just integrating it with stormwater treatment, it's also improving the planting conditions in general and investing more in upfront costs and design for street trees. So just going out and planting 1 million trees is not necessarily, I think, if you do it the way you've always done it, it's not necessarily going to improve things a lot. A lot of those trees won't live to become a large tree if it's a large tree species. So that's a big part of the challenges of working with trees and integrating stormwater treatment into those systems. But we are seeing a lot of multiple benefits from doing GSI, and that is definitely a success. So to wrap up, I have some resources about green stormwater infrastructure, and bioretention is one of the main ones that we use. These are 5 different resources for you from around the Bay Area that you can refer to. And this is my contact information if you want to follow up with me after the workshop. So that's the end of my presentation. We can see if there's any questions just for me, I guess, or we can wait for later.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, thank you, Peter. Wonderful presentation. We do have some questions in the Q&A. We'll hold off and listen and answer some of those at the end of everybody's presentations. But thank you so much for all that wonderful information, and so good to see how communities in the Bay Area are really taking advantage of this stormwater management system. So thank you. All right, moving along, I'll introduce our next presenters. With us is Anthony Pham, who is currently a program coordinator with the California Conservation Corps. In addition to his main role, he also serves as the ATP Corps Consultation Liaison, where he manages and processes Corps consultation for 3 program cycles. He is dedicated and enthusiastic about supporting the Corps' mission by fostering collaboration with ATP applicants and awardees. And co-presenting with him is Sarah Ward, who is a special advisor with Environmental and Energy Consulting. She supports the representation of the California Association of Local Conservation Corps managing and processing consultations. In her previous project management role, she acquired experience in full project lifecycle management for state and federal grant programs and regulatory compliance. She is excited to support new and returning ATP applicants interested in this vital program, which helps bring work experience and training opportunities to young people. So with that, I will have them start pulling up their slides, and then we do also have one poll question, which you all should be able to see on your slide on your screen now. And the question is, have you ever worked with California Conservation Corps or local conservation corps on an ATP project? And I see those answers coming in. So a good majority so far is indicating no, and perhaps that is because the opportunity hasn't been there yet. So through our presentations, we hope we have inspired some greening infrastructure to now take place into your ATP projects. And our next speakers will let you know exactly how to start that process. So thank you. And Anthony, I will turn it to you and to Sarah.
You, Alicia. Let me know if it's sharing the full presentation mode.
Yeah, I see your I see it on presenters.
Maybe it's sharing the wrong screen again. Let's do
Not a worry.
one. Okay, how about now?
That looks perfect. Yep.
Sorry, one moment here. Slide. So, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. My name is Anthony. Again, I am a representative of California Conservation Corps. We hope that through this presentation, we'll provide you some information, basic information, or awareness on the California Conservation Corps and the local Conservation Corps around California. We hope that this presentation explains the Corps consultation process. Looks like a lot of you are new to it, and why it's required for the active transportation program, how the Corps can get involved in your project proposal or assist in the implementation of your green infrastructure projects. And if it's not feasible for the Corps to get involved in your project, we hope that through the Corps consultation process, it will encourage future partnerships with the Corps outside of the active transportation program. So let me go to my next slide. So in legislative language for Senate Bill 99, it directs the ATP projects to include the use of the California Conservation Corps, or the Triple Cs, or the Certified Community Conservation Corps, the local corps. The provisions there. Really, the intent is for the projects to engage youth participating in these workforce development programs with opportunities to participate in transportation sector career path projects. So it provides them with training and hoping that they transition to a transportation employment with an agency. Per the ATP guidelines, points will be deducted if an applicant does not seek Corps participations, or if an applicant intends not to use a Corps for a project where the Corps can't participate in the project. So who's the Corps, Conservation Corps of California? The Conservation Corps enroll young adults between the ages of 18 and 26 to perform important conservation projects throughout California. Conservation Corps are rigorous workforce development programs that combine work, education, leadership, and career development. There are two types of corps. There's the California Conservation Corps, which is a state level department within the California Natural Resource Agency. It's modeled after the National Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s. We currently have 20 sites across the state, including 7 residential centers. The local corps are 14 state certified independent nonprofit organizations located across different California communities. They're really focused on kind of their local community. They enroll young adults between the age of 18 and 26 to perform important conservation projects. The state certified is to meet strict requirements for rigorous programs to combine work, education, leaderships, and career development. So here's a map. Our CCC centers and local corps go all the way to Crescent City, all the way down south to San Diego. So there are 2 project types for the purposes of Corps consultations, implementation projects, which mainly include any project work that includes hand labor. It also includes outreach, education, and then the other type is planning and non-implementation projects. Those projects are, strictly solely planning or acquisitions. So for implementation projects, the applicant must consult with the CCC or the local Corps, or we just call them Corps, to determine the feasibility of the Corps to participate in the project, or you'll accept any deduction if you choose not to. To avoid point deductions and receive preference on your proposal, you must submit project information through a web form that's located on the California Conservation Corps webpage. The link is on the slide here. The Corps will review your project application's feasibility within 14 days and provide evidence of consultation that that you should include in your application, whether that be an email determination or a determination through a letter. The Corps cannot guarantee a compliant review process for applicants who are submitting fewer than 14 days, but we'll try our best to meet that deadline for you. Again, for planning and non-implementation projects, the process does not apply. So this includes planning proposals again and acquisitions. If you're not sure if your project meet these requirements, please contact us through atp@ccc.ca.gov. Project examples. So the Corps provides supervised work crews of young trained adults that are equipped as well to work safely on a variety of different projects. Just like the projects that Peter discussed in his last presentation, the Corps can work on green project activities on street medians. It's an ideal project that we have worked on and could work on. Here are other examples: repair and remove or replace sidewalks, sign installation, planting and tree planting, tree removal and tree care. This includes fields reduction. We do maintenance, like clearing trails of downed trees, clearing trail site clearance, removing invasive species, maybe preparing the project site for the much larger project activities, bike lockers and bike rack installation, irrigation. We do drought tolerant landscaping, demolition and deconstruction, trail construction, urban park construction, graffiti removal. This list is not exhaustive. So if you're not sure if a Corps can participate in a component of your projects, please do reach out. So I believe I'll go ahead and have Sarah present the remaining presentation. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Anthony. All right, so the benefits of using the Corps. Utilizing the Corps is included in legislation to enhance the public benefit of projects by creating workforce development opportunities for young adult Corps members, many of whom live and work in disadvantaged communities and vulnerable populations. The Corps and natural resource projects provide comprehensive job training, career development, educational opportunities, and career pathways for young adults to enter specialized fields, including firefighting, forestry, energy conservation, and other environmental fields. And because Corps members often work on projects in their own community, they gain an added satisfaction in their work, along with building community connections. Next slide. All right, so the Corps consultation process. There are 3 key steps to engaging in the consultation process. First, the applicant visits the CCC consultation webpage and submits their project details via the web form. Second, both Corps will review the project's feasibility and notify applicants within 14 business days whether either Corps can participate. Third, the applicant will provide evidence of the consultation and Corps' determination to include in their grant application submission. Some important notes to keep in mind during this process: the Corps do not need to be included in a bidding process, as ATP PRC takes precedence over competitive bidding regulations. The Corps are exempt from prevailing wages, and applicants are strongly encouraged to reach out early during project proposal development to determine how the Corps can be included and to ensure a compliant review process, especially because the Corps cannot guarantee a compliant review process for applicants who submit the required consultation web form request fewer than 14 business days before the application deadline. Next slide. All right, so these are some screenshots of the complete job form That is the Corps' consultation request form. And these are some of the questions that are required. We estimate it should take about 15 minutes to complete this web form, especially if you have all the project materials at the ready to reference and upload. Particularly a map is important to upload just to give an example for whether the Corps are in that particular jurisdiction and service region territory. Next slide. All right, so scoring with the Corps. There are a few important notes for scoring that we discussed. By not consulting with the Corps on your application, you automatically lose up to 5 points on your application. If an awardee indicated on an ATP application that they intended to use a Corps, but ultimately failed to use or chose not to use the Corps after funding was received, the entity will receive negative points up to minus 10 points on their next ATP application for the next cycle. So it's definitely beneficial to engage in the consultation process. And please note, the Corps must be consulted on all other projects, including planning projects, scientific studies with field work, baseline studies, invasive plant removal, native plant propagation, mapping, and site maintenance. Next slide. So what to do after receiving an award. If your project was deemed feasible for Corps involvement and received an award, the awardee is responsible for reaching out to the Corps project manager listed on your feasibility determination notice. You can then confirm the Corps' availability, discuss your project work details, schedule a call or site walkthrough, and understand the contracting process a bit better. Please note that both the CCC and LCC can be hired for a grantee's project if there is enough project work for both to complete. It's fully up to the grantee's discretion to use which Corps or both Corps to hire, and we're always open to collaboration with each other. Next slide. All right, so access to the Corps consultation form and our contact info. Please save these following email contacts for the local Corps and the California Conservation Corps. You can access the Corps consultation form below at the following link, which can also be seen from the webpage on CCC's site. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you both, Sarah and Anthony, for going over that information with us. And next, we will hear from Marianne, who will share ATP guidance for greening projects, as well as share a couple examples of green infrastructure from ATP projects. Some of the information that Marianne will cover, so there's links that will take you to the ATP guidance that shows more information on this, as well as those contacts that were shared from the CCC. So thank you all. And Marianne, I will hand it over to you and I will share screen. There you go.
Hello everyone. This is going to be a bit repetitive since we just heard from the Corps, but just so you know, there is guidance on greening projects in the ATP guidance document. I have linked up here the 2025 Active Transportation Program guidelines because we won't have the 2027 ATP guidelines until they're approved at the March 2026 California Transportation Commission meeting. But you can see what the guidelines are in Appendix C in the 2025 guidelines on which is page 47 of the guidance document. And what it lists is what we just heard, that you should contact the California Conservation Corps or a local conservation corps. And I just pulled out these 3 examples, but as Anthony had that extensive list on his slide, these 3 are listed in the ATP guidance document, which is irrigation, landscaping, and tree planting. Those are just 3. And there are other activities that the Corps can help you with, but I pulled out these as they related to greening. If you have any questions about what you're planning in terms of greening and planting, do contact the Conservation Corps, or of course, as per usual, contact your district ATP coordinator if you have questions. The next slide, these are just 2 of, there are others, but there are 2 of the Cycle 6 ATP funded projects that included greening, and these 2 included trees. So the main purpose of the trees, as Dan very eloquently mentioned, is for shade, for cooling. And Corcoran's in the Central Valley and LA obviously is much bigger, and that's the purpose. Because they both experience extreme excessive heat in the summertime. But I would like to add that just 2 weekends ago, it was 95 degrees in the Inland Empire. So we're having more and more climate results and hot days. So it's not just in the summertime. But they're both, the purpose of the trees were to cool the bike and pedestrian pathways that they ran along, as well as for aesthetics. And they each had sort of other unique reasons besides aesthetics and shade. The Corcoran grant mentioned trying to prevent jaywalking. There was a lot of jaywalking happening along that corridor where they were planting trees. And in Los Angeles, along this corridor, there's a lot of speeding. And so they rationalized that the canopy of the trees makes the street seem narrower, so it would slow down drivers on that particular road. Both of these projects did incorporate or will incorporate community engagement in terms of the type of shade tree that they would prefer. So those are just two examples in Cycle 6 of which that were funded for greening projects. And I'll turn it back over to you, Alicia.
Awesome. Thanks, Marianne, for providing that to our audience. And so with that, we have wrapped up all of our presentations today, and we'll now open the floor for questions. So please continue using the Q&A feature to submit questions, and we'll do our best to address as many as we can. And I know that some questions have already been answered by our panelists, so thank you so much for doing so. Let's see if there are any others that are coming in, but also, Peter, I know you answered the 2 that came in. If you wanted to elaborate any more on that, feel free to do so as well.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit more about training.
Sure, yeah, please do so.
I didn't mention, so there's a couple programs in the San Francisco Bay Area. The programs, one of which is in the Santa Clara Valley. It's the Green Gardener program, and that's one of the programs that we administer. There's also a nonprofit called Rescape. They actually are national now. They started in the San Francisco Bay Area, but they do trainings now for people all over the country. And they do have now specialized training for GSI, like vegetation maintenance. And then there's also the National Green Infrastructure Certification Program, or NGICP. And we have done trainings in the San Francisco Bay Area with that program, and we worked actually with the San Jose Conservation Corps on some of their members attended that training, as well as members from Grassroots Ecology, a nonprofit, So I think we're trying to do more training, and I think workforce training has a lot of potential to create green jobs related to GSI as well.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, I am not seeing a whole lot of questions come in anymore. Looks like the questions we've got have been answered. Dan, I don't know, I'll also let you add anything if you wanted to as well, but no pressure to do so.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually don't have anything else to add about the grant programs and the question I answered, but I did want to just mention one kind of data mapping tool that might be of use and relevance for folks if you're not already aware. But there is a tree equity score kind of mapping tool. And I know our partners at UCLA has incorporated shade data into this platform. And so I can plan to provide the link to the host team who can share out with our attendees. But it's another tool that can help to identify like shade deserts in our communities and help target where to plan and try to increase shade and green infrastructure. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. That'd be excellent. And just the same as we'll do with the grant programs and the resources that Peter shared, we'll put that all together in a resource document. But also just a reminder that the slides of all the presenters will be made available, so you'll be able to see that information on their slides as well. So excellent. All right. Well, it's a quiet audience, so hopefully
I can talk a little bit more about trees and equity. I think it's a great point, Dan. There are a lot of jurisdictions have what they call canopy coverage goals. And so they look at their urban forestry program. They do a street tree inventory and an inventory of the trees that they have in other public areas, sometimes as well on private property as well. And they put that all together and they can calculate what their canopy coverage percentage is for their whole jurisdiction. And it's often between 10 and 20%. Some of the jurisdictions that have more trees, like Palo Alto, I think they can get up to 30 or 40 or 50, even 50% in some neighborhoods. But there does tend to be a correlation between wealth and more canopy coverage, unfortunately. And so a lot of jurisdictions are now realizing that, and they're trying to increase canopy coverage in the lower income neighborhoods and make it more equitable for all folks in their communities. There's one particular jurisdiction that I know of in Boise, Idaho, that also, even though it's not explicitly maybe an equity program, they look at canopy coverage. When they're thinking about doing a project, they look at localized flooding or other issues that might be related to insufficient stormwater infrastructure. And so they use those two factors to decide where to do a project. And they do a lot of trees and GSI projects where they're planting trees that are also managing stormwater. And so they use those two factors of the canopy coverage and the stormwater infrastructure to decide where to do that. And that ends up kind of being an equity related result. So because it's often the case where the low canopy coverage is and where the infrastructure is poor, then that tends to often have an equity aspect to it as well. So there are a lot of, I think Oakland is also doing a lot of work on this, as well as other jurisdictions in the Bay Area. There is also the danger, though, of that have negative impacts as well. Like maybe it raises property values in that area where you do that work. And so then that can cause stresses on those populations as well if it's not combined, say, with other programs that can help people stay in those buildings and not let maybe the rent go up or the prices go up for those affected communities. So it's a complicated situation. We're trying to do all of these things together.
Peter, I have a quick follow-up question. Dan mentioned his data mapping, tree mapping tool. Is there one for canopy as well?
Yeah, I think there's iTree is a software application that a lot of people use to map their canopy coverage. Um, I know there are some other ones too, but off the top of my head, I can't remember. But I know iTree is a commonly used one. I do think there are publicly available um, mapping websites that you can look up your community and it can help you decide or figure out what the canopy coverage is and some of those equity issues as well. So yeah, there are resources out there. Maybe I can provide those afterward.
Great, thank you.
And I'll just note that tree equity score tool does have a layer for tree canopy cover and tree canopy gap as well.
Yeah.
Again, I haven't delved into the data and how granular it gets, but it may provide like at least a baseline.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Thanks.
Sure. Thank you for that information. All right.
So I mentioned that trees, or we talked a lot about trees, and there are some challenges with using trees and GSI. One of the big challenges in the Bay Area is, and I think I mentioned this a little bit, is the particular soil media that we use. It's called BSM or biotreatment soil media, and it's designed to let the water, uh, the runoff, go through that landscape quickly because you don't want to have water that's ponding for too long because you can start to get mosquitoes in there, and then there's a lot of mosquito-related diseases that Dan, we didn't talk about that aspect of public health, but that is a danger of whenever you're putting in GSI is that if it's not designed and constructed and maintained properly, it could result in a mosquito problem. And so that is one of the reasons why we have this media that drains very quickly. Also, it drains quickly because you don't want to have a really large area. If possible, land prices are very high. We want to have a small footprint for these systems. So that's another reason why they use a very permeable soil media. The downside is that it doesn't hold water for very long, and so it doesn't have what they call water holding capacity for the plants. And so then you have to irrigate those areas more than maybe you would a typical landscape. And native plants, even though they can be very drought tolerant, if they're not in the soil, if they're usually in like maybe a clayey kind of soil, then even the native plants can't do as well without irrigation. So we are looking at the plant palette, and sometimes we're shifting to plants that are more like in dunes areas where it's a sandy kind of soil. And there are some plants that can do well in that kind of dune environment, sand dunes. But we also are looking at other things we can do to change the specification for that biotreatment soil media, such as I mentioned, I think adding biochar. Biochar has a lot of water holding capacity. So if you add like 10% biochar, there's one study that shows it can double the water holding capacity in that soil media. So, and biochar has a lot of other possible benefits to it. So there are things we can do. There's also some design options for trees. There are ways to do what's called suspended pavement systems where you can have uncompacted soil under pavement using these modular systems. One product is called a Silva-Cell. There are other products like that. And so then you can have more soil volume for the trees, even though you have pavement around them. But typically a tree is planted in a tiny hole and then you have compacted soil all around it, a street tree. And then it has those problems that I mentioned. So there are design options to help trees provide more soil volume for them. There's also public policy like the city of Emeryville and the city of Palo Alto have a policy that says when you plant a tree, it has to have a minimum amount of that soil volume so that it has a good chance for it to grow and become a tall tree. There's this one project in Emeryville where they planted a bunch of street trees and they gave them more soil volume. And just after 15 years, they're now shading about half of the street. So it does still take some time. That is one of the downsides of street trees or trees in general, is that you don't always see the impact right away. But they have so many benefits if they can get to become large trees, if they are that kind of species. The large trees have a lot more benefits than small trees.
Yeah, definitely very good points there. All right. Well, thank you for those who submitted questions, and you can find those answered on the Q&A. We will also post those questions and answers into our resource document. All right, so just wrapping up here, we will share the next slide. And so Marianne and I are available to provide technical assistance for non-infrastructure projects. Displayed on this slide is our information with the districts that each of us supports. So feel free to contact us at our emails for any ATP NI questions you may have. And in closing, I would like to thank our wonderful presenters today and our audience for joining us. This is the last ATRC webinar of the year, but we hope you will join us next year in future webinars. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day, and look out for that email with the recording of the link, the slide deck, and the research document, which will come hopefully by the end of the week, but no longer than a week from now. All right, now everybody, take care and stay safe. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.